the Commissioner of Prison Correction Services, I should say, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, also the Tala Tala. Bula Vinaka, and a very good morning to all of you. It gives me much pleasure to be here. As you know, that today we are commissioning two of the projects. One of them, of course, in particular is for the catering of remand prisoners, and the second is providing facilities for our younger inmates and also the elderly inmates. You know, if I could reflect on the criminal justice system very briefly, for decades in Fiji, as part of the criminal justice system, of course, you have your investigators, your prosecutors, and then at the end of it, then of course within that you have the judicial system, and then you have the correction services. And in fact, the last tenet of the criminal justice system, the correction services in Fiji, was for decades was actually neglected. I could tell you numerous horrendous stories about the conditions within which the prisoners were kept in the correction facilities, not just in Suva, but also throughout Fiji itself, whether it was here, whether it was in Ba, or whether it was in Vanuatu or Taveuni for that matter. The reality of the matter is that you should not neglect any of the tenets of the criminal justice system. Because if you do so, then your criminal justice system is actually not delivering what it's supposed to do. One of the basic principles, of course, of the criminal justice system, in particular when you get into the correction services, is to provide, of course, deterrence, is to provide confidence to the victims of crimes, is to provide confidence to society at large, for example, when you're dealing with white-collar crime, etc. But it's also an aspect of the tenant, and that is to provide rehabilitation. The ability to have those who have fallen foul of the law to be able to be rehabilitated. Rehabilitation, of course, means you do not you not only have the right approach to rehabilitation, but you also have the right environment. And that right environment, of course, involves not just the way in which the prison wardens interact with the inmates, the approach to discipline, the approach to, in fact, for example, looking after them in respect of providing food, the quality of food, but it's also the physical environment itself. So whether your toilet facilities are up to scratch or not, whether the cells in which they live in, the beddings that they have, and also part of that is your ability to be able to distinguish in a more nuanced way those different types of inmates that you may have. So your ability to deal with the elderly, your ability to deal with the youth, your ability to deal with those who may be remand prisoners as opposed to those who are convicted prisoners. And in fact, for a number of years, and this predates many of you, and in fact most certainly predates the current Commissioner of Corrections. I remember when I was at the DPP's office back in 1999, Lautoka was notorious for having remand prisoners being mixed with convicted prisoners. And that obviously is not a very healthy situation. In particular, you had sometimes people who may have, fallen foul of the law for the first time, and sometimes for very minor offences, and yet they had to interact with those who are fairly hardened criminals and those who had been through the system itself. So that, has what some may call in social terms a contamination effect, and in effect that psychologically affects many people. So government, under the Beni Marama government and of course the Fiji First government, we made a policy decision to ensure that we not only improve the conditions of those who work within the correction services in terms of salaries, the job evaluation exercise, but also the facilities within which they live in, for example, staff quarters. And then, of course, to be able to ensure that the environment for those who have been brought to the criminal justice system and have to serve a particular term are in the right environment. And as you've seen, those of you who may have studied the criminal justice system in Fiji, the rate of recidivism in Fiji a few decades ago was 50%. I remember there's one particular gentleman that we had on appeal back in 1999, and when I looked at his history, he had actually appealed his conviction. He first went to prison at the age of 18. And he was at that point in time when he appealed, he was about 36 years old. But he had spent 14 years of his life in prison, between the age of 18 and the age of 36. Essentially, the door to the prison became like a revolving door. There was absolutely no emphasis on rehabilitation. And he had, suffered some serious assaults when the first time he went in was for a very minor offense. He was actually sexually assaulted. And that just became a revolving door for them. And that particular instance that we were appealing, he had just been released from Korovo at 2 p.m. And by 7 p.m. that evening, he was actually robbing somebody at the yacht club, a particular yacht that was there with a few other people, and then sort of escaped in a dinghy. And then he got caught. So he was back in there again. So that was the kind of scenario we had. Rate of recidivism was about 50%. Today, the rate of recidivism is below 10%, which is a huge accomplishment. And therefore, the initiatives such as the Yellow Ribbon program and various other works with the faith-based organizations, with the various community-based organizations, must continue. So what we are launching today, the commissioning of these premises, is a small facet in the wider philosophical approach to the correction services in Fiji. And I want to, of course, thank right from the Commissioner of Correction Services to all the staff that are involved, the various NGO partners, civil society partners, the various faith-based organizations, and everybody involved, the UN, agencies that have been involved, the Human Rights Commission. I mean, we need to take a very transparent approach in dealing with the correction services. We need to engage with all our partners. There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to be ashamed about. And there's absolutely nothing wrong in saying, where are the gaps and how can we work together to be able to actually correct or fill in those gaps. It's critically important for us to be able to take that approach. And because if you take that approach, then you'll be able to correct those, those gaps that we do have very, very quickly. Of course, we'd like to thank the construction companies that have been involved in this particular project. As you know, with COVID-19, we not only have to take various health measure steps, but we have to take various economic steps to be able to address the fact that revenue has been very drastically affected by the fact that our borders are closed essentially. Tourism sector is stopped essentially, as far as external tourists are concerned. But we need to work towards opening up the borders in time to come, of course, depending on how this disease particularly evolves. And God willing, that'll happen soon. God willing, there'll be a vaccine soon. But in the meantime, we need to be frugal, we need to be prudent, but we also need to be creative in respect of how do we deal with the current situation at hand. So I'd like to thank the Commissioner for organizing this. I mean, this is great. There's nothing simplistic or downgraded about this. I think this is a great ceremony for the opening. The reality of the matter is that all ceremonies are great as long as we all feel very compassionate and passionate about what we are doing. And I think that's critically important. So thank you once again for everybody involved. The correction services can be assured that government, given its current economic situation, will be able to continue to work with you. Of course, certain things can be put on hold or can be actually delayed, or we can come up with creative ways as to how we can particularly deal with particular situations at hand. So, Vinaka Vakalevu, and I thank you very much for your attendance this morning. Thank you.